The tutorial for Chapter 26 in your Beginning AutoCAD workbook. Okay, so in Chapter 26, we're going to learn something completely new. We are going to learn to work with layout and then to work with viewports on our layout. So all along, everything we've been drawing in something called model space. And you'll see that down here it says model. Over to the left along the bottom, you have model, and then you have something called layout tabs. So let's click a layout tab. And you're not going to see anything. You're just going to see a blank page. You might have a little dialog box pop up, a setup manager, but you won't see anything else on this page. So let's go back to while we're on layout, look over here, and now you're in paper space. Okay, so this is our sheet of paper. Our model is whatever we've created and it's floating around in space somewhere. Okay, so let's look and see how these work. So I have a little drawing that I've done here in my model space, same as what you guys did for all your other exercises. I'm going to go into my layout tab. When working with layouts and viewports, best practice is we're going to create a new layer. We're going to call it viewport or viewports. Let's see if I can make this bigger for you to see. There we go. Okay. So we have our viewport layer created. I'm going to change the color of it. I'm just going to make it a dark green. And I'm going to turn on, this is really important, turn off your printer for that layer, because when we create this thing called a viewport, we don't want it to print on our drawing. We want the stuff in the viewport to print, but not the actual box that we drew itself. Okay, so viewports is created, and I'm just going to make that my active layer. Okay, so with viewports, the command that you're going to use, it's called make view, but you can just type in MV. So MView, make view. And there's a whole bunch of options in your command line, but we don't care about those right now. I'm going to specify a corner. Specify my first corner by left clicking, specify my second corner by left clicking. So what has happened is we have this dark green box on the viewport layer, and we cut a hole in our sheet of paper, and we're looking out into model space right now. So just to show you, let's say that I changed something out here in my model space. I'm just going to draw a couple of circles here. Oh, snaps on. Okay, I'm going to come back to my layout tab. So all that I've done, I created a viewport, and that viewport cut a hole in my sheet of paper, and I can look out into my model space. So let's say I was doing a drawing, which is what I'm going to be using my layout, my paper space for. I'm going to create a border out here. I won't have a border back in my model space anymore. I'm going to have a nice border on this sheet of paper, and then I'm going to have multiple viewports. So to activate a viewport, see how right now when I scroll, my whole sheet is moving? To activate a viewport, you double click inside of that view. So now your viewport box turned bold, and when you scroll or pan, you're just scrolling and panning what you're looking at in that viewport. Your model out in space isn't moving. All you're moving is what you're looking at here. To get back out of that, I'm going to double click back out on my sheet of paper. Let me show you this, sorry. So down at the bottom of my screen it says I'm on my paper right now. When I double click inside that viewport, now I'm looking into my model down on the bottom by your access bar. So now I'm back on my paper. So if I typed something here, T-E-S-T, sorry, S-T, test. When I look at my model, it's not out there because I just wrote that on my sheet of paper. If I selected and deleted this viewport, my text is still just on that sheet of paper. Okay, so let's talk about how we set up this sheet of paper. So we've created our drawing out in model space. I'm going to turn off that border because I don't care about any of that stuff right now. We don't need that. All of this should be on my border layer also. Okay. Okay. So when you come to your layout tabs, I said you might have a dialog box pop up. If you didn't, that's okay because I'm going to show you how to get it. You're going to right click where it says layout, whichever sheet you're on, layout 1, 2, however many layout pages you have, because you can add more. Right click on it and select Page Setup Manager. So right now I'm on layout number 1. I want to change this. I want to modify this. And that's just talking about my printer from before. Okay. So right now, the sheet of paper that I'm working with is 11 by 17. If I wanted to set it up for a larger drawing, I could take my 22 by 34. Okay. Layout number 2 is just an 8.5 by 11. Nothing's been done, nothing's been created for it yet, nothing's been changed. So I'm just going to stay on layout number 1 and say close. Okay, so now I have a larger sheet of paper. So when you right click on that layout tab, there's other things you can do in there. You can create a new layout, you can copy them, delete them, plot from them, but this is the first thing that you do. You go into your Page Setup Manager and get your sheet set up. Okay, so I have my sheet set up. I'm going to switch back to my viewports layer, and I'm going to make a couple of viewports, or actually I'll just make 2 to start with, MV. So I'm going to make one kind of big one, and I'm going to make another smaller one. And the size of the viewports don't matter at all. I'm just showing you something here. Okay, I'm going to go inside of this first viewport. So let's say that the main part of my drawing is this house. Okay, so I want that house to be the main view of my drawing. So let's say I get it all lined up. I'm going to go out and I'm going to get rid of that little circle I added just to help set things up here. Oh, And I'm double clicking back inside that viewport. You can turn your grid on and off in there as well. So I'm just going to turn my grid off. Okay, so now I could zoom in and out. So as I zoom, I'm still getting the top of that cut off. So then I could just select my viewport. And I can say, okay, I want to make that viewport a little bit bigger. And you'll notice when you zoom, down here in the bottom right, that number is going to adjust because it's scaling when you're zooming. So if you knew what size you wanted this to be, I don't for this one because we didn't measure it as we were drawing it, but if I selected, and that one does not work at all, let's say I said 1 inch equals 1 foot. So that's what I would end up with as my drawing view. That would be the scale, or sorry, 1 foot equals 1 foot. That would be the scale of that drawing view. So you can act real scales for things. Remember, that's kind of that little house that we drew, so it's really only about 4 inches big. So I could say, no, I want to blow it up more in that view to 2 to 1 or 4 to 1, whatever it is. So I'm just going to put that guy back to 2 to 1. And I'm going to say, okay, well, yeah, I like the way that viewport looks. So once you get your scale or your zoom set and you get it panned to where you want it to be, go down and hit lock. So that viewport is locked now. Even if you're inside of it, you're not going to be able to change it. You won't accidentally move anything. So let's look at our second viewport. So in this viewport, what I want to do is I want to focus. Let's say I have a detail drawing. This one doesn't really have any details, but let's say I wanted to show the window for some reason in better detail. So I could blow this up. Remember, the house was 2 to 1. Let's say I could blow it up to a larger scale. I could blow it up 8 to 1 and show it on my drawing. Because remember, even though we're modeling this stuff and just drawing lines in it, what we want in the end is to have drawings, printable paper drawings. And as you know, they have more than one view on them. So that's how to create your viewport, so MV. It's how to double click inside of it to activate it, move it around, zoom in and out, change your scale of it, and then once you get it set the way you want it, to lock it. We talked about paper, so when I write something, I'd just be writing it in paper space, which is what you'll end up doing when you have to put labels on your views. And then the end of chapter 26 goes through how to plot the layout. To plot from the layout tab, it's really no different than plotting from your model space. The last thing that they mention in chapter 26, page 26-22, is annotative property. What that means, annotative property for text and for dimensions, is that when you create different viewports at different scales, your text and dimension sizes, not the values of them, but just how big they look, will change to match the scales of whatever scale you've selected for the view. So just to show you where that is, because you'll be working on that in lesson 26 as well for the exercise. Go under your annotate tab, go to your text panel, go to your flyout, and when you go to create a new one for chapter 26 or exercise 26, just right here, this annotative is what you're going to be checking off. And as you're working, you'll know that your dimensions and your text are set to annotative if you see this little scale picture beside them. Because remember, way back when we first did blueprints, lesson 6, you learned about scales. So that's kind of the cross section of an architectural scale. So as long as you see that symbol on your text or on your dimension, you know that it's set to annotative. Okay, so that's the overview for lesson number 26. So in lesson 26, the objectives were to, I'm just flipping back to the start of your book here, were to understand the difference between model and layout tabs, to create a viewport, so that was MV, to create a page setup, that was when you go to your layout tab, right click and do page setup manager, create a plot page setup, so exercise 26 will walk you through the settings that it wants for your plot setup. You'll be creating a new template called Desmo Setup Master that you'll be using for other exercises after this. And with that, you'll be creating a new border as well. And you're going to make a bunch of viewports. Okay, so that's what lesson 26 is. So good luck with your layouts and viewports. And that's all of that. That's the end of the tutorial for chapter 26.